It was day 5. We all woke early the morning following the attack on the church. Steve had final watch in the tower. As we all convened in the pavilion, he came down to join us. Breakfast that morning was simple. Steel-cut oats with honey and raisins, strong coffee, and fresh apples picked from the trees that lined the dirt driveway leading up to the pavilion. We talked about the events of yesterday and our need to fortify our positions. We discussed a few other issues as well, but we all agreed the fortification issue took top priority after what happened yesterday. The church sat on just over 10 acres in rural New England. The frontage was heavily wooded with one driveway leading onto the property and up a large hill to the church. The church could not be seen through the woods from the road. Directly behind the church is the parsonage where Aaron and Callie lived. Off to the right and up a dirt drive was the pavilion. We had 4 disabled vehicles on site. Pastor's caddy, Greg's pickup, the old Impala driven by the intruders yesterday, and an almost new 34-passenger shuttle bus the church purchased last year to take church trips with. Greg, who's retired and comes out faithfully every week to mow the grounds, had voiced his opinion against the shuttle bus purchase. He wanted a new zero-turn mower and a tractor with a snowblower attachment on it instead. He viewed the shuttle bus as a luxury and said it wasn't justified. Following consensus, we bought the shuttle bus. So we used Steve's power wagon to pull the 2 cars down onto the main driveway, about 100 feet or so from the road, just around a corner out of sight, so you couldn't see it from passing the road. We placed them bumper to bumper perpendicularly in the driveway to block the driveway. Then we placed the shuttle bus parallel to and just behind the cars. Nothing short of a tank was going to push through that blockade. Then we rolled Greg's pickup to block the base of the stairs to the pavilion. There was a handicap ramp that was too narrow for a vehicle on the side by the fireplace, and that would provide adequate egress for foot traffic on and off of the pavilion. There was a pile of pressure-treated 2x6s behind the pavilion that were used to build the perimeter frame for the skating rink that we put up every winter in the pavilion. We took several of them, drove framing nails through them at different angles every inch or so. We laid them across the very beginning of the driveway and secured them down by driving large galvanized spikes through them into the asphalt driveway. We then broke the men up in 3 2-man teams so that we could address several other issues simultaneously. Richie was a ham radio enthusiast, and he and Steve had built a Faraday cage out of a steel toolbox made to bolt to a truck bed. They lined it with copper mesh panels that they soldered together and grounded to a piece of rebar sticking out of the concrete floor in Steve's basement. Then they covered the entire exterior with rolls of lead that old school plumbers used to use, which they got from Steve's uncle's barn when he passed. He was a plumbing contractor in the area in the 50s and 60s. He had all kinds of stuff in there. They overlapped the seams and hammered them together until they were flat. I used to joke with them about it, asking them if they were sending it into outer space. I always questioned the theories behind building a Faraday cage. I saw some people build them out of garbage cans and different designs. I guess I never had much faith in that. I guess the joke is on me though, because when they opened it up and took the gear out, it all worked. There was a solar charge controller, and inverter, as well as an old ham radio Richie put in there. In the bottom of the job box was 3 200-watt solar panels, as well as 2 small fold-out trifold solar panels, about the size of a notebook when folded up. There was also 6 handheld CB radios with chargers and a base model CB radio that ran on AC or DC power. There were several other electronic items as well. Steve was a veteran. He was in the Navy in the late 70s and early 80s. During that time, he served the majority of it on a small island off the coast of Africa, which served as a forward staging area and airfield during the Cold War. Diego Garcia was actually a series of small islands. Steve was a communications specialist there for 7 years. Steve and Aaron were tasked with setting up a solar array and a ham radio station. They had an antenna with 60 feet of cable which they would mount on the tower platform. Steve, Richie, and I were preppers. Because of that, we had what we had. I couldn't help get a little upset, angry even, at these guys who made fun of us for prepping. They joked, called us fearmongers, conspiracy theorists. Now they weren't making fun. Imagine how much further advanced we could have been if they all took it seriously too. Linda and Cheryl, Steve's wife, were also a little skeptical. They thought we were going a little too far with prepping, but they supported us just the same. You know, in marriage, money is often a source of contention between spouses, and so I guess without their support, it would have been real hard to divert a budget into preps. Richie's wife, Sharon, was in total denial. She didn't even come here with him. She stayed behind at home, believing the authorities were going to be coming at any time to render aid and assistance. She was a financial consultant for a large corporation, made a lot of money annually. She was lost without her computer and cell phone and other electronic gadgetry. Their marriage was shaky for quite some time. Her and Jolie didn't get along too good. Jolie loved her dad and despised the way her stepmom treated him. She wanted Richie to be happy and urged him on several occasions to leave Sharon and get a divorce. Richie wouldn't do it. He tried to show his daughter that when you make a commitment, you honor it. He had always said that he and Sharon stood together before God, promised to be together as one until death parted them. He tried to show her that you don't break the covenants you make with God. Sharon herself had tried to get Richie to leave, but he refused. Now that she refused to join him, I could sense the relief in him. He had honored his vow. It was she who refused to follow him. He always said, when the time comes to go, she will have a choice to make. God does give us free will to do as we choose, but He doesn't release us from the consequences of those choices. We have to live with those. Meanwhile, Richie and Pastor were charged with building a rocket stove and gathering wood to burn it to boil water. We were going to try to conserve propane for the gas grills for cooking only. There was a pile of cinder blocks down in back of the garage left over from construction of the pavilion 8 years ago. They would work nicely for the rocket stove. Greg and I were going to take a hike up through the woods onto the side road leading back toward the school. We were going to check out the houses along that road to check on the status of any neighbors who might be there. We had heard small explosions randomly throughout the day and seen smoke coming from that direction. We decided to go out and be back by dusk, about 6 hours off now. We each took a handgun with 3 mags of ammo. I took my Mini 14, Greg took his 12 gauge. Greg took a handheld CB radio, he gave one to Lee. He assured her that we would not be going further than a mile and that we would be in radio range at all times. He told her sternly not to transmit on the radio no matter what she heard, that he would call her if needed. He told me to take a radio also, but not to turn it on. This puzzled me, and he explained that by doing this, if we did get caught or killed, anyone who encountered us would just think we had the radios to communicate with each other, and thus we would not be giving away the fact that we had others in radio range of wherever we were. I asked, well, why leave it turned off? He explained that if the battery wore down on one, we would still have a full charge on the other one that was off, effectively doubling our radio time. He then said, "You don't walk around in a jungle with people everywhere trying to kill you for 3 years without picking up a few valuable pieces of knowledge." "Amen, brother," was all I said. Once again, I was happy Greg was stranded at church on that first day. We walked quietly through the woods without incident. Greg told me to stay 100 feet behind him at all times, to move when he moved, and stop when he stopped. He said silence is our best strategy. When we got to the first driveway, we couldn't see the house back in the woods, but we smelled the smoke. Greg approached the house by walking in the woods parallel to the driveway. Walk 50 feet, stop. Walk 50 feet, stop. And it took us forever to get up that driveway. I followed likewise. The spot where the house was just up ahead. Burnt to the ground, the pile was still smoldering. Greg motioned for me to come up to him. He was crouched behind an old stone wall. When I got up to him, he quietly told me to stay there and cover him with my rifle, following his movements. He walked slowly around the burning pile into a barn off to the right where the house was, off to the right of where the house was. He slowly leaned in to look through a window. At that moment, the door flung open and 2 men came rushing out single file. The first one had a shotgun. As Greg reeled around to face them, I fired, killing the guy with the shotgun. Almost instantly, Greg fired 2 shots with the shotgun, hitting the second guy and critically wounding him. He put up his hand, signaling me not to shoot again, and he walked up to the man lying on his back, writhing in pain. As Greg started to speak to him, the guy on the ground lifted his sidearm, aiming at Greg. Before he leveled his hand, I fired 3 times, striking him twice. He was dead. Greg, with his back to the barn wall, right next to the door, pointed into the barn. I nodded, and he quickly spun around and faced into the barn. With the shotgun leveled, he walked in slowly. I pulled my .45 out and ran over and into the barn behind him. Nobody else was in there alive. There was a man tied to a post. By the look of it, he was beaten to death. Behind him was a woman on the ground with a bullet in her head. Her dress was torn off her, and it was clear what had happened. Greg looked at me and said, "I've seen enough for one day. Let's head back." I fell in behind him 100 feet as we slowly walked back to church. When we arrived, we explained to the others what we found. They were concerned after hearing the shots. Lee said it took everything I had inside me not to call out on the radio. Greg smiled at her and said, "That's my girl." We had some pasta and sauce with canned veggies for dinner. We sat around the fire for about an hour, and then we all turned in. Pastor had first watch in the tower. Thanks for watching. Please like and share the videos and subscribe to my channel. Stay tuned for day 6 very soon.